Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives, and it's a Monday morning, May 26, 2025, here on a slightly cloudy, cool May morning, May 26th, almost to June, and it's beautiful. Anytime it's around 70 degrees, 75, 80 even, I'm very comfortable, and been working in the garden this weekend. Of course, I had a wonderful show with my wife Marcia and the chat room last Friday, and thanks all of you for participating in that. Did a lot of serious talk about prostate cancer and the advanced cancer that lots of people are suffering from. Unfortunately, President Biden, Mr. Scott Adams, and myself are in that category. But I am dealing with it very well with I've got good doctors. I've got the tremendous support of at least a dozen very strong-hearted people that are helping me sort through the options and choose the right path. And we're doing well. We're doing very, very well. So I just thought I'd get that out of the way before I got into the context of today's show, which has a little bit of show and tell in it, if I don't mind saying so myself, because Anton Chaitkin's book, Who We Are, the second volume, one of the central characters is Henry Carey, Carey, the son of an Irish immigrant, Matthew Carey, who had been influential up until the Civil War. But during Lincoln's administration, the son, Henry Carey, comes into his own and really provides the intellectual background for America's industrialization in the second half of the 19th century. It's a person that you don't hear of in standard Rockefeller history. And the great importance of this book is to remind us, who we really are. And Henry Carey represents the America we wanted to be, we should be. And the story that Anton Chaitkin tells us is the story of how the empire, the British Empire, continually through financial and other means, including assassination, continues to wrest control of our country from we the people. It's an ongoing story, and suppressing the part that is told in volume 2 of Who We Are has been the business of what we call Rockefeller education and the takeover of history by storytellers that make up stories in favor of making America Great Britain again. Well, you can tell my attitude and that of Henry Carey are pretty similar. So maybe my Irish roots are speaking here. And speaking of Irish roots, I can't help but participate in celebrating one of the other names that's mentioned in this book, and that is John Philip Holland. Who is John Philip Holland? Well, John Philip Holland invented the submarine. And the only reason that I knew that was because of a song that I learned back in the 1980s from a very famous Irish traditional singer named Michael Russell. Michael Russell lives on the coast of County Clare in a little town called Doolin, which has now become world famous for traditional music. Well, back in the 70s and 80s, people used to travel to Doolin to find Michael Russell and his brothers and learn songs and tunes, especially tin whistle tunes from Michael, and I was one of them. So one of Michael's songs is about John Philip Holland. And I'm going to show you a picture here, if I can call it up, of myself and the famous inventor. There. Now, this was in Liscannor. Liscannor is on Liscannor Bay, which is part of the coast there of County Clare. And this is John Philip Holland looking out of his submarine, a sculpture that is there at his birthplace in Liscannor, County Clare, Ireland. And that's me, a picture by Marcia. We were over there visiting in 2010, and that's back when I had my long hair as well. You can almost see it. Well, that's me making a pilgrimage to the birthplace of John Philip Holland, the namesake of the song. And so now I'm going to, if you will indulge me, sing the song for you. So this song is, again, it's sung by Michael Russell. It was written by a man named Brendan Higgins of Lahinch, and Lahinch is the town where I believe my O'Loughlin's come from, right next to Lahinch. So it's a beautiful little beach, by the way. If you ever get to Ireland, go to Lahinch. And so here's the song. Oh, there's a little introduction I can read to you. John Philip Holland from Castle Street, Liscannor, was a Christian brother from 1858 to 1872 when he left the order and emigrated to teach in New Jersey. Abetted by the Fenian leader John Devoy, Holland developed the submarine, which he hoped would be used against the British. It is a matter of historical irony that when in 1895 he formed a company, the British Navy soon ordered several of the craft for their own fleet. And there is a biography of Holland written by a Martin Cohen in the publication Dalcash in Irish. So I can not sing it as Michael Russell did with his beautiful Irish accent, but I will give you my own version here. Come, all you young Irishmen who walk upon the land, their feats and deeds and fairy creeds that you might understand. There's one of them that comes to mind, the likes was never seen. He was young Philip Holland who invented the submarine. It was in Liscannor he was born, in the wild west coast of Clare, not far from the cliffs of Moher that hang so high in the air. Liscannor Bay stretches far away from Hag's Head to Raneen, for young John Philip Holland who invented the submarine. For 14 years he taught at home in his own dear native land. Through immigration he sailed away unto a foreign strand. In Paterson, New Jersey, on his work he became quite keen. It was there, our man, he formed his plan, and he called her the Submarine. The U.S. Navy thought the man was crazy. They'd thrown his plans aside. But Holland paid no heed to them below beneath the tide. The Fenian ram of 81 now by all was seen. The boat and show could go below, and they called her the Submarine. With torpedo guns both fore and aft, she became a most dangerous craft. Beneath the waves she could remain, it drove the Navy daft. Down below, where only fishes go, the yoke was plain to be seen. It was John Philip Holland inside his first submarine. In the year of 1914, the year of the Great War, a death appeared in the papers. It was read both near and far. That man, he died in poverty, but he did realize his dream. He was John Philip Holland, who invented the submarine. Come, all you sailors, both young and old, and listen unto me. You'll go on a boat that will go afloat below under the sea. Be a Russian, Cuban, Austrian, Australian, or Philippine. Raise your glass in the air for the man from Clare who invented the submarine. There you have it. John Philip Holland. John Philip Holland, the song famously sung by Michael Russell. Check him out. You can find some videos of him on YouTube. There's not a lot, but unfortunately, he died back in the late '80s. But I got to meet him and actually share a tune with him a couple of times. So there's your song. Now, let's get into the text. Who We Are, Volume 2, America and the World. And again, Henry Carey has now, after the death of President Lincoln, carried on in Philadelphia with the American system, financing the Pennsylvania Railroad for the purpose of internal improvements. And the story that is told about those important decades from 1865 to 1898 is the guts of the rest of Volume 2. Now, we were speaking with Anton Chaitkin himself last week, the author of the book, and he and I ended up speaking a lot about Pope Leo XIII and how important he was to changing America in favor of the working person. And so I'm going to select the portions of the book that have to do with Pope Leo XIII and kind of tie them together, not only with John Philip Holland, the inventor of the submarine, but also with the change in America as we head into the progressive era, which is brought forth out of this era that we're talking about right now. So we start with Henry Carey traveling a lot to Europe, spreading his system, the American system or the nationalist system, into Italy, to Germany, and especially in Germany, he is well read. And so I'm going to start there on page 481. Bismarck. Bismarck shifts national policy. Beginning in 1878, Germany, under Bismarck, effected a top-down change in its political economic strategy, ending conformance with British free trade policy that had been hegemonic since the London-Paris-Cobden Treaty of 1860. In 1879, Bismarck conferred over the ongoing programmatic shift with the visiting Congressman William D. Pig Iron Kelly of Philadelphia, Henry Carey's most faithful adherent within the U.S. government. A protective tariff. particularly for iron and steel manufacturing, was adopted as a permanent German national policy. This was seen as a return to the full national ideal of Friedrich List. A system of state welfare protection for workers was enacted with unemployment compensation and pensions. Industries were cartelized for greater productivity, as in the pooling of laboratory facilities. Large banks, interlocking with the state-sponsored cartels, were created to finance national and international development programs. Isn't it interesting that Bismarck finds cartels to be a good way to do business? The government intensified state sponsorship of education, of physical infrastructure, railroads, canals, ports, merchant ships, and a modern navy. In the resulting leap of productivity, Germany's cities and industries were electrified. The nation's machine tool capability, which was enhanced by this combined policy program, was supported by the newly great electrical, chemical, and metallurgical industries. Although Germany's princely oligarchy was not crushed and remained a pivot for future disaster, Bismarck and the Carey-led American faction had created a new pro-nationalist ruling elite structure with a lasting commitment to technological progress, strikingly similar to that of the Americans. As the USA vaulted past Britain to world industrial leadership, Germany was suddenly rushing past Britain towards number 2 rank. A remarkable change in the Catholic Church's leadership eased the way for Bismarck's epoch-making policy shift. Pope Leo XIII was installed in 1878 and ended a virulent conflict between the emerging German nation and the country's Catholics. Leo emphasized the connection between Christianity and compassion in the political economic sphere. The British lords, the Catholic Habsburgs, and other imperial leaders panicked as they saw America's nationalist upsurge spreading and threatening the rout of oligarchism. Imagine that, you know, America threatening uh, the rout to rout out oligarchism. And here we are fighting oligarchs today. Intrigues by the British King Edward VII and his foolish cousin, the German Kaiser, would lead up to World War I and the political catastrophes that broke up America's international alliances. But Britain's permanent hysteria over the post-Civil War U.S. outreach is shown by its purging of Lincoln-Carey politics from historical accounts of the period. That's why we never hear about this. One can still see the shadow of these events in the so-called Austrian School of Economics, concocted by the British and the Habsburgs in the 1880s in reaction to Germany's radical policy reversal. In this ultra-free market dogma, the doctrine of Friedrich von Hayek and of today's neocons, Otto von Bismarck and Abraham Lincoln, are made into the twin bogeymen of modern history, the supposed originators of authoritarianism. Carey and the Irish Underground. 100 years after Matthew Carey had become an Irish revolutionary, his son Henry Carey plunged in and took responsibility for reviving the Irish struggle for independence from Britain. Carey's disciple, Philadelphia Irish immigrant physician William Carroll, was designated head of the American wing of the Irish Revolutionary Underground, called the Fenians, or their new name, Clan na Gael. Dr. Carroll was chairman of the Clan na Gael Executive Committee from 1875 to 1880. Clan na Gael just means family of the Irish. William Carroll was backed in the movement's leadership by other Carey allies, notably Knights of Labor Chief Terence W. Powderly and University of Pennsylvania economics professor Robert Ellis Thompson. Dr. Carroll's main partner in this work was Irish revolutionary John Devoy, Now, I've just mentioned, now I just sang about John Devoy, his partnership with John Philip Holland in the song, right? Who had become foreign editor for James Gordon Bennett's New York Herald. Several others of the Irish nationalist movement joined Devoy in guiding the Herald, a newspaper that we recall was quite useful to Thomas Edison. Carroll and his colleagues sent cash and guns to Ireland, and in 1878 Carroll toured the British Isles, reuniting the bickering Irish underground into a cohesive force of 20,000 members. Carroll and Devoy outmaneuvered the British spies and dupes who pressed for dynamiting and other provocations. See what they do? They want to discredit a genuine revolutionary movement by getting it to do terror bombings, dynamiting. The American leaders guided the underground movement into cooperation with Charles Stewart Parnell's Land League and electoral politics. 20 years later, this Kerry initiative would result in the formation of the Sinn Féin Party, which went on to free most of Ireland from British rule. Perhaps Dr. Carroll's most spectacular enterprise was the invention of the submarine. The Clan na Gael Skirmishing Fund, quote unquote, paid Irish immigrant John Holland approximately $60,000 to build prototype underwater warships. Carroll justified the expenditure by reference to Robert Fulton's similar craft in the 1790s. The three-man submarine, Fenian Ram, was tested in New York Harbor in May 1881. The British Embassy protested, but then President James Garfield refused to interfere with the Irish operation. Garfield was soon afterward assassinated. The U.S. Navy in the 1890s decided to revive the Clan na Gael's maritime project for American national purposes and paid John Holland to build the Navy's first battle submarines. Now I'm going to skip through some text about both Russia and Japan, which is all very important stuff because of showing how America was reaching out in all directions to establish peaceful partnerships of mutual benefit, while at the same time that whole idea is the biggest threat the British Empire has ever faced. So the story of how things went from America and Japan working together to Britain causing wars to happen between Japan and China, all of that, and Russia is in this section, but we're skipping forward to catch up once again with the Irish and with Pope Leo XIII. The Kerryite labor movement. Terence V. Powderly is well known historically as the head of the first mass organization of working people, called the Knights of Labor. Under Powderly's leadership, it grew from a little Philadelphia-based secret society to a nationwide movement of 800,000 members, black and white, women and men, immigrants and natives, employed and unemployed. Powderly's outlook coincided with Henry Carey's advocacy of the harmony of interests. The Knights guided workers in the study of political economy. They stressed the common interest of all producers with the progress of industry. They defended the rights of workers against those employers who attacked them. Powderly avoided strikes if possible, emphasizing the human solidarity that would impede the boss's ability to use different working people against each other. The Knights appealed to a broad and diverse array of working people, bucked the trend toward narrow trade unionism. Those who would create the industrial labor movement of the mid-20th century may be seen as Terence Powderly's grandchildren. Pardon me. Honey, could you bring me some water if you hear me? Powderly's sophisticated leadership outwitted agent provocateur, outwitted agent provocateurs at home and abroad. He opposed labor violence and anarchism, and while condemning the dynamiters, he was the treasurer of the skirmishing fund of the Clan na Gael that sent the guns to Ireland for the Kerry organization. Powderly sparked the nationwide rise of the Greenback Labour Party, promoting the crusade of the Kerry Circle for government issue of ample paper currency for easy credit. He won 2 terms as mayor of Scranton, Pennsylvania, on the Greenback Labor ticket. Irish immigrant coal miners in Pennsylvania's anthracite fields provided a core support base for Powderly and the Knights. Anglophile Canadian and other reactionary elements in the Catholic Church attempted to prohibit Catholics from membership in the Knights and to have Powderly excommunicated. The pro-labor Archbishop of Baltimore, James Gibbons, championed Powderly's cause with the Vatican, including inducing Pope Leo XIII to bring about the Church's acceptance of the Knights of Labor. So the pro-labor Archbishop of Baltimore, James Gibbons, I'm going to see if I can show you his signature on my grandfather's diploma. Let's see. Maybe not. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this would be easy, but I haven't been able to do it. All right. I'm sorry. I'm not going to be able to do that because I haven't studied that part of the program yet, and I do apologize. Anyway, I have my grandfather's diploma. I've showed it to you before, and it is signed by this same man, James Cardinal Gibbons, in 1919, June the 11th, 1919, and it has a seal on it too. So, again, this is very exciting to me because it's Tony's book is putting my family into historical context in many ways, including me. It's really cool to feel like you're actually finding your latitude and longitude in history. It's cool. The anti-nationalist financier political faction of the Republican Party, known as the Mugwumps, were furious at this combination of Christianity, labor organizing, and American nationalism. Their faction's New York magazine, Puck, ran a cartoon attacking the Knights of Labor and Cardinal Gibbons, depicting ugly and ignorant workers stoning a poor strikebreaker. Puck published dozens of cartoons showing Pope Leo XIII as a thief and a corrupter of the dangerous classes of American working poor of Irish extraction. Excuse me. The Anglophile establishment's horrified reaction to Pope Leo XIII and the Careyite labor movement helps us to a better appreciation and understanding of Catholic social doctrine. The idea that society is obliged to care for the downtrodden stands in history as the specific challenge of the Republic to the Empire. And that is italicized and underlined by the author Anton Chaitkin, because he wants us to understand that the idea that society is obliged to care for the downtrodden stands in history as the specific challenge of the Republic to the Empire. It rejects the Malthusian lie that the murder of the poor is nature's decree. Again underlined and italicized, the sacred valuation of each human life goes beyond any particular religion. It is essential to the Republican ideal of human rights and human dignity. We will see in Who We Are, Volume 3, how Catholic social doctrine, even as it conflicted with powerful church elements, would work as a forerunner to Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. Well, isn't that exciting to look forward to Volume 3 and tying that very interesting connection? You know, I studied the progressive era and with a kind of a looking with a jaundiced eye, you might say, uh, because it is the beginning of what we now have, all of this, extreme leftist, what we call wokeism, or the people that would vote for Joe Biden just out of knee-jerk reaction. Yeah, it's not Trump, so yeah, Joe Biden. That whole group of people, they are progressives, but that doesn't mean that progressivism was bad. And certainly, if you look at the improvement of labor conditions from before and after, with the exploitation of labor as basically is nothing more than slaves, then some responsibility to care for those downtrodden arises in a republic where people consider themselves to be citizens as opposed to serfs or slaves in an empire. So, and again, I have been very down on the Catholic Church for a long time, but here you see somebody taking an initiative uh, and using the power of persuasion to change Catholicism from Pius the Ninth, the guy that says he's infallible, right? He just, and the loser of the Italian uh, Revolutionary Wars. Uh, this guy who's tied to the aristocracy of Europe, and now Leo XIII comes in and he's pitching his tent with the working people. It's again part of history that I think is very, very important and casts a different light on the progressive era that is really, helpful to me. And plus, it ties my grandfather's education in beautifully to this whole thing. All right, now I'm going to skip forward. And we're on page 502. The Kerry Circle selects a U.S. president. It was in their Penn Monthly, edited by Henry Carey's disciple Robert Ellis Thompson, that the Kerry Circle in May of 1879 first proposed the presidential candidacy of Congressman James A. Garfield. The magazine's publisher, Wharton Barker, declared him to be a man of high principle and the best man for the White House. Barker wrote that Garfield had atoned for his past membership in the Free Trade Cobden Club by now providing staunch support for a protective tariff. A Civil War general and former Greek teacher, Garfield had devised a unique proof of the Pythagorean theorem while discussing geometry with other congressmen in 1876. In a December 1879 letter, Barker proposed to Garfield that he should run for president. Barker had recently come to public notice for his high-level dealings with the Russians, and he was seen as continuing the work of Henry C. Carey, who had died in October. Barker and Garfield met in January 1880 and agreed that Barker would proceed in his efforts to secure the 1880 Republican nomination for Garfield. Carey's associates now put into play the political apparatus associated with the industrial league they had created. 200 Philadelphia leaders signed a manifesto issued by a meeting of prominent Philadelphians at the home of Carey's nephew, Henry Carey Lee. This started up the National Republican League, aiming to break Wall Street's hold over the party and national politics. So again, this is history I didn't know, that, Wall Street took over the party. I knew that, the whole Gilded Age. But did you know that there was opposition, and it's called the National Republican League? In an article Barker wrote decades later, he described the three main candidates: James Blaine, John Sherman, the brother of General Sherman, and former President Ulysses Grant. Barker calculated that none of these three could get enough delegates at the Republican convention to take the nomination. Barker crisscrossed the country, very quietly setting the springs of action. He procured New England's opposition to Blaine. The Carey team secretly swung the Philadelphia Republican machine out of its lock for Grant. The Careyite delegates to the 1880 Republican National Convention included Wharton Barker, Henry Carey Lee, Robert Ellis Thompson, and at least two other members of their Penn Club, and the Pennsylvania Railroads Council, Wayne McVee, acting as Barker's partner. Some of Carey's Irish nationalists attended as spectators and cheerleaders. Barker directed paid squads in the galleries and on the floor to applaud whenever Garfield arrived for a session. And you thought that kind of showmanship in Congress was new, huh? All right. Barker's nationwide contact network performed on schedule, and all of his calculations proved accurate. Supremely confident, Barker left Chicago for Russia during the deadlock to help plan the industrialization of southwestern Russia and Ukraine: coal, iron, steel, and railroads. In a letter to the Russian Foreign Ministry, he wrote of the common work of Russia and America, namely the dismemberment of the British Empire, quote unquote. Blaine released his supporters to Garfield, turning the tide, and Garfield would make the nationalist Blaine his Secretary of State. Sherman ceded his support to Garfield after President Hayes, following Barker's prompting, had urged him to do so. The Wall Street faction was mollified by making Conkling's New York operative, Chester Arthur, the vice presidential candidate on the Garfield ticket. Robert Ellis Thompson had included Clan Nagale chief William Carroll in their plan. After the nomination, Dr. Carroll brought into Wharton Barker's banking office two visiting Irish Revolutionary heroes: John O'Leary, the imprisoned and exiled Dublin newspaper editor, through whom Carroll and Devoy regularly sent American funds to the IRB, and John O'Connor, who had for many years dodged British arrest as the chief channel of Irish Republican Brotherhood communications within the British Isles. Dr. Carroll later explained what ensued, quote, "It was decided to issue an appeal to the Irish nationalists of the United States as American citizens to vote against the English policy of free trade, through which Irish industries had been destroyed and which, if not defeated, would ruin those of America." Chester A. Arthur, the candidate for vice president, promptly pronounced the appeal hopeless, but with this opinion, Marshall Jewell, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, and Mr. Barker differed, and the appeal, written by Professor Thompson, appeared in 15 places in one day in the New York Herald, was placarded all over the walls of New York, and widely circulated elsewhere, all at Mr. Barker's expense. The response was the election of Garfield and Arthur. As the Philadelphia leaders were then stirring millions of Irish in America to support their struggling brethren back home, they prevailed on them to depart from their traditional support for the pro-free trade Democrats and vote for Republican Garfield. The Irish were decisive in the November election. Garfield won the popular vote by only 9,000 out of the 9 million national total. New York's 35 electoral votes gave Garfield the victory, with his margin of 21,000 out of 1.1 million ballots cast in that state. The U.S. government in American hands. Unease grew in New York and London prior to Garfield's inauguration. Could their stalwarts, defeated for the presidency, still control the U.S. Treasury? Senator Conklin was demanding the post of Treasury Secretary for his ally, the New York banker Levi Morton, partner of Britain's Sir John Rose, Baronet. The New York Times reported that President-elect Garfield had offered to make Morton Secretary of the Navy, but, quote, General Garfield's declination to give him the secretaryships of the Treasury was caused by the fact that Mr. Morton is the senior member of a leading banking house in London and New York, which house has been a party in all the great syndicates for the placing of government loans, and he is particularly associated with all the banks and bankers in this country and Europe, unquote. As a congressman, Garfield had opposed syndicate financing in favor of bond sales to the people. Now he said he wanted no Wall Street man at Treasury. James Garfield took office on Friday, March 4, 1881. He appointed Robert Lincoln, son of the murdered president, as Secretary of War, and Wayne McVee, Wharton Barker's convention lieutenant, as Attorney General. James Blaine, outspoken opponent of the British Empire, became Secretary of State. Minnesota protectionist William Windom took over at Treasury. Anti-Ku Klux Klan Louisianan William H. Hunt became Secretary of the Navy, with a mandate to swiftly upgrade U.S. naval forces. On March 10th, a telegram informed Barker that the Tsar had ordered the acceptance of his concessions to help industrialize southern Russia, now that a government so favorable to his viewpoint was in place in Washington. A creative younger generation was beginning to work toward Mendeleev's vision of a powerful Russia, taking its rightful place beside its American ally. The 31-year-old railroad developer Sergei Witte, that's Sergei, S-E-R-G-E-I, and last name Witte, W-I-T-T-E, would soon emerge to lead Russia's progress out of feudalism, as an open advocate for the economic nationalism proving its success in America and Germany. On March 13th, 9 days after Garfield's inauguration, Tsar Alexander II was blown up by a member of the nihilist movement that was notoriously co-sponsored by the British Empire and the Russian black nobility. A global anarchist congress would assemble that summer in London. Prince Kropotkin would brag to 700 anti-national terrorists about the continuing murder campaign against the Russian government. The frightened successor, Alexander III, moved his residence out of St. Petersburg, but Garfield moved straight ahead. Confronting Britain in South America. Wharton Barker had proposed a Western Hemisphere customs union to Garfield before his election and to the new President and Secretary of State when he met with them in April 1881. Just as Friedrich List's tariff union, the Zollverein, first brought together Germany's disparate states, the U.S. could negotiate a common shield to protect the wages and rising industries of both North and South America against British domination and cheap labor looting. This must be coupled with respect for national sovereignty and a drive for peace. The Garfield administration adopted this outlook and went into action, intervening in a South American crisis that had been brewing for several years. The British demanded absolute control over South American finance and resources. They determined to exterminate Peru as a nation. 2 successive nationalist Peruvian presidents were assassinated in 1872 and 1878. Nitrate deposits extended across the border into Bolivia and Chile. Chile was also pursuing some development. MiGs had built railroads there as well. The British supplied Chile with arms and officers. The British trading company W.R. Grace, first time I hear of them in history, W.R. Grace, right? Based in Lima, Santiago, and London, supplied Peru with arms and advised its government. These neighboring countries were manipulated into a land and minerals conflict. Chile invaded Peru in 1879 with 7 British Navy ships patrolling the coast. By mid-1880, Chilean forces occupied Lima, and Peruvian minerals were being sold off to pay British bondholders. Before Garfield and Blaine intervened, U.S. diplomats allowed Britain's representatives to dictate American acceptance of this mayhem. Blaine resolved to deploy any aid necessary to protect Peruvian sovereignty and end the war. On May 18, 1881, Garfield nominated Stephen Hurlburt, Lincoln's tough counterintelligence specialist, as ambassador to Peru. By that time, the global strategic conflict had become a brutal face-off inside the United States. And in New York, 2 years earlier, William Carroll, John Devoy, labor leader Terence Powderly, and their Irish Republican Skirmishing Fund had spent $18,000 funding a new superweapon aimed at the Royal Navy. Irish emigre inventor John Holland built the first modern submarine, a 19-ton 4-man boat powered by a 17-horsepower Brayton petroleum engine, as displayed at the 1876 Centennial Exhibition. It was designed to fire dynamite-laden torpedoes. Just like the song. I'll just make another personal note. One of the first music gigs I had as a part-time musician was back in 1976 or 7 at the Centennial Exhibition at the Smithsonian, which was the 100th anniversary of the 1876 Centennial Exhibition. So I don't know. I'm just enjoying all of the relationships here. As Anton Chaitkin's story fills in huge holes in our history. With Garfield in the White House, the vessel, nicknamed the Fenian Ram, was taken to Hoboken, New Jersey, and put into New York Harbor to be tested for combat duty. The first successful dive took place to spectators' amazement in June 1881. The British consul in New York protested to the Treasury representative, the collector of the port of New York, demanding government surveillance of the project. But the administration viewed the submarine as a private experiment and left the Fenians free to pursue it. Political dynamite was then exploding all around Wall Street. The collector of the port wielded great patronage, enough financial power to take on Wall Street. New York's congressional representatives were usually given their own choice for the office. After being denied control over the presidency or the Treasury Department, stalwart boss Conkling insisted the collector must be his man. The president's nomination of Blaine's friend William Robertson for the post so shocked and dismayed the stalwarts that both Conkling and his fellow New York Senator Thomas Platt resigned their seats. 2 days later, the Senate confirmed Robertson. It was thus Robertson who passed along the futile British protest against the Fenian ram. Conkling was finished politically. Garfield was now in high gear, exercising the power of the presidency to the fullest. He became wildly popular across the country in this battle against the financier power. He allied himself with Southern black people and with workers, farmers, and U.S. manufacturers. The crushing of Conkling inspired the assassin, Charles Guiteau, to take action. So Guiteau later testified. A virtual zombie, evidently susceptible of manipulation, Guiteau had been for years the victim and underling of a mind-control sex cult in Oneida, New York, run by the old Tory John Humphrey Noyes. Guiteau began stalking and threatening Garfield. He shot the president on July the 2nd when Garfield was waiting at a Washington train station with Secretaries Blaine and Lincoln. As Garfield fell, Guiteau shouted, quote, "I am a stalwart, and Arthur is now president," unquote. The double attack on the progressive Russian leader Alexander II in March and the crusading American President Garfield in July stunned the world. Garfield held on for 2 months. Ambassador Hurlbut departed the day Garfield was shot and arrived in Peru as Garfield clung to life. General Hurlbut clashed sharply with British diplomats and recognized the presidency of Francisco Garcia Calderon, who had been chosen by the underground Peruvian nationalist leadership. When Garfield died in September 1881, Hurlbut asked Blaine for instructions and was told to press ahead. Blaine dispatched the USS Alaska, which landed a brother of President Calderon carrying money and instructions for Peruvian resistance fighters. Britain's Chilean proxies arrested President Calderon and took him away to Santiago. Chilean invaders destroyed the greater part of Peru's productive facilities, and British bondholders seized control of the rail lines. The nation of Peru was thrown back to de facto colonial status. On November 29, 1881, Secretary of State Blaine called for a Pan-American peace conference of all the republics in the Western Hemisphere. A number of nations had accepted the invitation when President Chester Arthur fired Blaine 2 weeks later. The new Secretary of State, Frederick Frelinghuysen, Huysen, Frelinghuysen, canceled the proposed hemispheric peace conference so as not to invite European jealousy and ill will, quote unquote. Frelinghuysen was intimate with the Rothschilds. With the Rothschilds' American representative, Auguste Belmont, and was the law partner of Belmont's son, Perry, a congressman who held hearings on Blaine's, quote, corruption, unquote. Auguste Belmont later remarked, quote, "The country might have been plunged into a war with Peru if poor Garfield had not been assassinated." The dimming of the universal spirit. Abraham Lincoln's leadership and Henry Carey's teaching had raised the United States into a position to be uniquely beneficial to the human race. They had expressed a deeply spiritual understanding of the potential of all men to cooperate, to advance, and to overcome the want of sympathy between nations and races, which is at the root of imperialism and wars. Their achievements echoed down through the years. President Grant, though befuddled on financial questions, carried on the essence of the Union cause to fight in his fight for the rights of Black people and his insistence on the sovereignty and lofty destiny of China and Japan. But the Lincoln era had become a distant memory. James G. Blaine is a case in point. Perhaps the chief of the protectionist politicians after the Civil War, he understood the evil of British imperial objectives and their being dressed up as academic economic doctrine. So he fought for the rights of the American working people, but he lacked the insight into how a divinely gifted eternal soul connected each person to the whole community of man, all of whom were made of one blood, as St. Paul preached, and how this human identity makes us capable of continual advancement. Thus, Blaine made himself a chief national spokesman for the exclusion of Chinese immigrants to the United States. All right, and now I'm going to go to the appendix, which addresses Catholic social doctrine. And let's see, that'll be 5. Okay, and now to wrap it up, Appendix 3, Bismarck, the Pope, and the Birth of Catholic Social Doctrine. The objectives of the Republican nationalists could not be attained without solving a needless, destructive political religious conflict. Chancellor Bismarck, the wily East Prussian Junker aristocrat, was squaring off in his Kulturkampf, or cultural struggle, against the Roman Catholic Church led by Pope Pius IX. The May laws and other measures against German Catholics had been adopted by Prussia and the newly consolidated German Empire in the period 1871 to 73. British Crown agents were playing a double game with respect to the Church. Anglicans intrigued with North European Protestants, Jansenists, Old Catholics, and Orthodox Russians to whip up reaction to the perception of danger from the new papal infallibility doctrine. The London-based stooge Giuseppe Mazzini had been thrown against Italy, his revolution and Freemasonry terrifying and cornering the Vatican. Pius IX, Pope from 1846 until his death in 1878, because of his fear of revolutionary republicanism, looked favorably upon the British-backed slave owners' rebellion against the American Union. Meanwhile, British Catholic counselors within the Church helped keep the Vatican confined to the false choice, protection of the Church by Black nobility oligarchs versus giving in to the atheist onslaught. Pius was rendered incapable of communicating with Germany's leaders, who had made the Catholic Church their enemy. As a result, the Catholic Center Party, representing Germany's sizable Catholic population, was led into opposition that blocked Bismarck's nationalist policies. Henry Carey had endeavored to outflank the British Mazzini game in Europe. Carey met with Count Cavour, an advocate of railroad building modernization in Italy, in the late 1850s, and worked with Italian patriots to promote a unified Italian nation. Leo XIII was elected Pope in February 1878 after he had closely monitored the German crisis for 7 years. Leo immediately applied his new power to solving the problem, writing to Germany's Emperor William of his regret at the rupture between Germany and the Vatican. Bismarck responded to the peace offering, quote, "I began as soon as the present Pope ascended to the throne to open negotiations with Monsignor Masella, the papal nuncio." Kulturkampf was soon abandoned by agreements reached between the German government and the Vatican. Leo XIII aligned the Catholic Church with the ideals which were in that era embodied in the national aspirations of both the USA and Germany. The defense of labor rights, strongly advocated in the church by Baltimore Archbishop James Gibbons, was taken up by Pope Leo, who made Gibbons a cardinal. Leo's encyclical Rerum Novarum, that means of new things, s- subtitled On the Condition of the Workers, declares it's society's duty to ensure a decent existence to the working class. This is the birth of the Catholic social doctrine, working for the harmony of interests between all members of society and the sacredness of each human life. It was, in general, Carey's and Lincoln's view, most pointedly in opposition to Malthus, to the imperial assertion that human life has no essential worth. The Vatican authorized biography of Leo XIII contains bitter words about the oppression of Ireland and approval of Charles Stewart Parnell's Land League, the open political movement for Irish rights. At the time of Leo's accession to the papacy, the Philadelphia Carey Circle was intervening in Ireland to steer the freedom struggle into cooperation with Parnell. And that concludes the readings. I hope you enjoyed the song about John Philip Holland and the connection between the tradition of singing in the still preserved Irish culture in County Clare on the west coast of Ireland, and actual real history that has changed the world. Thanks for being with me today. I will see you tomorrow with our good friend Adam Finnegan. Adam Finnegan has a few thoughts about Maha and what is missing from Robert Kennedy's Maha. Bye now.